The Mysterious Man in the Treehouse. Tommy Daniels was 11, on the cusp of adolescence and rebellion. That night, frustration bubbled over after another argument with his parents about bedtime, video games, and how he wasn't a little kid anymore. In his defiance, Tommy stomped into the backyard and declared he would sleep in his treehouse, his sanctuary, his kingdom, untouched by parental rules. His parents, though annoyed, reluctantly agreed. "Just don't lock yourself out if you change your mind," his mom said, her voice soft with concern. Tommy rolled his eyes, climbed the wooden ladder, and pulled the rope up behind him. He relished the small victory of his solitude. The stars winked faintly through the branches, and the familiar creaks of the treehouse made him feel safe. Until it didn't. Tommy was drifting to sleep when he heard it. A soft rustling, like dry leaves moving, but deliberate. It wasn't the wind. His heart quickened, but he told himself it was probably a raccoon or some other harmless animal. Grabbing the flashlight he'd brought along, he shone it out the window. Nothing but the swaying branches of the old oak tree greeted him. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then came the voice, deep, gravelly, and impossibly close. "Tommy," it called, dragging his name out as though savoring each syllable. He froze, clutching the flashlight tighter. His mind raced. Had his dad come out to scare him? No. The voice was too low, too strange. His breathing quickened as he pressed himself against the treehouse wall, trying to convince himself it was a trick of his imagination. The voice came again, closer now. "Tommy, let me in." Tommy's fingers trembled as he aimed the flashlight at the trapdoor. It was locked from the inside. He'd made sure of that. But as the beam of light swept the wooden boards, his heart sank. A shadow moved. A hand, gnarled and pale, grasping the edge of the trapdoor. "Who's there?" Tommy shouted, his voice cracking. "I'm calling my parents." The hand retreated, but only for a moment. Then the trapdoor began to creak, the wood groaning under the strain of something, or someone, trying to force it open. Tommy screamed, scrambling backward until his back hit the far wall of the treehouse. The creaking stopped. Tommy's chest heaved as he stared at the trapdoor, praying it would stay shut. Then, slowly, a figure emerged, not through the trapdoor, but at the window. A face, pale, sunken, with hollow eyes that gleamed like polished stones, peered at him. Its mouth curled into a grin that stretched impossibly wide. "Tommy," it whispered. Tommy screamed louder than he ever had in his life, his voice piercing the stillness of the night. He fumbled for the small walkie-talkie his dad had given him, a relic of camping trips past, and pressed the call button. "Dad! Mom! Help!" he shouted. The figure at the window tilted its head, as if amused. Then, with an unnatural grace, it slipped out of sight. Tommy could hear the creak of branches as it climbed down the tree, but he was too terrified to look. Moments later, his dad's voice crackled through the walkie-talkie. "Tommy? What's wrong?" He could barely form words. "Someone's here. Someone's trying to get me." Seconds felt like hours, but soon the backyard floodlights blazed on. Tommy saw his dad running toward the tree, his mom close behind. "Tommy, come down," his dad shouted. Tommy didn't need to be told twice. He lowered the rope ladder and practically fell into his father's arms. He was sobbing, his words tumbling out in incoherent gasps about the figure, the voice, the face at the window. His dad held him tight, scanning the backyard with sharp eyes. "There's no one here, Tommy," he said, but his voice betrayed his doubt. The police arrived within minutes. Officers combed the backyard and the treehouse, shining flashlights into every crevice. They found nothing, no footprints, no broken branches, no sign of forced entry. But Tommy knew what he saw. "He was here," he insisted, his voice shaking. "He called my name. He tried to get in." The officers exchanged skeptical glances, but one of them knelt to Tommy's level. "We'll keep an eye out," she said kindly. "But it might have just been a bad dream." Tommy clenched his fists. It wasn't a dream. In the following days, Tommy refused to sleep in the treehouse. He stayed glued to his parents, his nerves raw and his mind racing. Who or what had been in his treehouse that night? One afternoon, while walking home from school, he noticed something strange. Mr. Grady, the reclusive neighbor who lived alone a few houses down, was standing by the fence. He was watching Tommy, his expression unreadable. Tommy froze. The man raised a hand in a half-hearted wave before retreating into his house. That night, Tommy told his parents about Mr. Grady. "He was watching me," he said. "I think it was him." His dad frowned. "Mr. Grady's harmless. He's lived here for years. Besides, the police didn't find anything." But Tommy couldn't shake the feeling. Mr. Grady knew something. A week later, Tommy woke to the sound of tapping at his bedroom window. He sat up, his heart pounding, and stared at the glass. A pale face stared back at him, its hollow eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "Tommy," it whispered, the voice low and chilling. He screamed, and the face vanished. His parents rushed into the room, flipping on the lights. "He's here," Tommy sobbed. "The man from the treehouse." His dad ran outside with a flashlight, but again, there was no sign of anyone. Months passed, but the fear never left. The family eventually sold the house, unable to shake the feeling that someone, was watching them. The new owners tore down the treehouse, but Tommy always wondered if they heard the same voice at night. The identity of the intruder remained a mystery, but deep down, Tommy knew it wasn't just a man. It was something else. Something that knew his name, his fears, and how to find him, even in his safest places. And it wasn't done with him yet. The Marshmallow Man. The Daniels family had always dreamed of living in a house like this. Nestled at the edge of a quiet suburban cul-de-sac, the home boasted sprawling green lawns, a glistening pool, and, to the delight of 8-year-old Jake, a magnificent treehouse. It stood like a fortress among the gnarled branches of an ancient oak, with a rope ladder, a trapdoor, and even a tiny balcony that overlooked the backyard. "This is the coolest thing ever," Jake declared as he climbed up for the first time, his parents smiling below. Little did they know something was watching, waiting. Jake spent every free moment in the treehouse, dragging his action figures, books, and sketch pads up to his new sanctuary. It was his kingdom, his hideout, until the day he found the note. It was tucked under a loose board in the corner, folded neatly. The paper was yellowed and smelled faintly of smoke. In wobbly, uneven handwriting, it read, "Hi Jake, do you like marshmallows?" Jake frowned, his fingers trembling slightly. He glanced around the treehouse, as if expecting someone to pop out of the shadows. But he was alone, shrugging it off as a prank, maybe left by the kids who lived here before. He crumpled the note and threw it out the window. The next day, there was another one. This time, the note was taped to the wall. The handwriting was the same, but the words sent a chill down Jake's spine. "What's your favorite candy? Do you sleep with the door open or closed?" Jake climbed down the ladder in a hurry, his heart pounding. When he told his mom, she laughed it off. "It's probably just something left by the previous owners," she said. "Don't worry about it." But Jake couldn't stop thinking about the notes. He checked the treehouse obsessively, and sure enough, every few days, another one would appear. The questions grew stranger. "Which window is your bedroom? Do you like playing outside after dark?" Jake started avoiding the treehouse. It didn't feel like his safe place anymore. But one night, as he lay in bed, a soft tapping sound pulled him from his restless sleep. Tap, tap, tap. He froze, his small body stiff under the blankets. The sound was coming from his window. Swallowing his fear, Jake turned his head, and his breath caught in his throat. An old man stood outside, his face pressed against the glass. His eyes were a sickly, glowing yellow, and his skin was pale and wrinkled like melted wax. He grinned, revealing crooked teeth, and raised a hand. Taped to the glass was a marshmallow. Jake screamed, His parents burst into the room, flipping on the light, but by the time they looked, the man was gone. All that remained was the marshmallow, stuck to the window. The police arrived within the hour. Officers combed the yard, checked the treehouse, and questioned the neighbors, but they found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, no clues. Jake's parents tried to reassure him, but he could see the fear in their eyes. "We're locking all the doors and windows," his dad said firmly. "You're not allowed in the treehouse anymore. Not until we figure this out." Jake nodded, but deep down, he felt like the house was already tainted. The Marshmallow Man, as Jake had started calling him, knew too much. Where he slept, what he liked, where he played, and he wasn't done. Weeks passed without incident. Jake began to relax, thinking maybe the man had moved on. But one afternoon, as he walked past the treehouse, he noticed something new. The trapdoor was open, swaying gently in the breeze. He wanted to ignore it, to pretend he hadn't seen it, but curiosity won out. Slowly, Jake climbed the ladder, his hands shaking. Inside, the treehouse was empty, except for a single marshmallow, sitting in the middle of the floor. Next to it was a note. "Miss me?" Jake bolted, nearly falling down the ladder in his panic. He ran straight to his dad, who stormed into the backyard with a bat. But by then, the treehouse was empty again. The family decided to sell the house. It wasn't worth the unease, the sleepless nights, the fear that someone or something was watching. But before they could leave, the Marshmallow Man made one last visit. It was a cold, quiet night. Jake was lying in bed when the tapping started again. He wanted to scream, to call for his parents, but he was frozen. Slowly, he turned toward the window. The Marshmallow Man was there, closer than ever, his yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. He pressed his face to the glass, licking his lips as he grinned. In one hand, he held a marshmallow. In the other, he held a note. He tapped the paper against the window until it stuck. Then he vanished, tears streaming down his face. Jake scrambled to read the note. Asterisk, "You can't leave me. I'll always find you." Asterisk. The police searched again, but the Marshmallow Man was gone without a trace. The family moved out a week later, leaving the treehouse and its sinister secrets behind. For years, Jake had nightmares about the yellow-eyed man, his grin, and the marshmallows that seemed to appear wherever he went. And sometimes, late at night, Jake could swear he heard tapping on the windows of their new home. The Treehouse Witness. Chris had always considered the treehouse a relic of his childhood. Built when he was 10, it had seen countless secret meetings, sleepovers, and adventures. Now, at 20, a college sophomore on winter break, the treehouse served a new purpose. A secluded spot to enjoy his stash without his parents finding out. It was the perfect hideout. Tucked away in the massive oak tree at the edge of their backyard, the treehouse overlooked the house but was hidden by thick branches. From there, Chris could watch the world go by while avoiding his mom's relentless questions about grades and his dad's passive-aggressive reminders to get a job. That night, the treehouse became more than a refuge. It became a witness to something terrifying. It was just after 10 p.m. The air was crisp, and the backyard was silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves. Chris climbed the rope ladder, his backpack slung over one shoulder, and settled into the familiar space. He unpacked his supplies, a small glass bong, a lighter, and a pre-ground mix of weed, feeling the tension of finals week and family obligations start to melt away. As he exhaled a plume of smoke, he stared at the house. The glow of the living room TV flickered through the curtains. His parents had probably fallen asleep on the couch, as they often did. Everything felt still, peaceful, until it wasn't. The first sign something was wrong was the sound of glass shattering. Chris froze, the bong halfway to his lips. He leaned forward, squinting toward the house, and saw shadows moving inside. His heart pounded. Was someone breaking in? He grabbed his phone, fumbling with the screen as adrenaline surged through him. He dialed 911, whispering into the receiver. "I think someone's breaking into my house. My parents are inside. Please send someone." A figure moved past the living room window, and Chris's breath caught. The man was tall, wearing a dark hoodie and gloves. Another figure joined him, this one shorter but just as menacing. Chris counted at least 3 intruders as they moved methodically through the house. "They're inside," Chris hissed into the phone. "You have to hurry." The operator's voice was calm, reassuring. "Stay on the line. Officers are on their way." Chris crouched lower in the treehouse, his eyes fixed on the scene below. He could see the intruders rifling through drawers, shoving items into bags. His chest tightened as he thought about his parents, oblivious, asleep just down the hall. Then one of the burglars turned, looking directly out the window. Chris's blood ran cold. The man's gaze swept across the backyard, pausing at the tree. For a moment, Chris thought he was safe, hidden in the shadows. But then the man's head tilted, and his eyes seemed to lock onto the treehouse. Chris ducked, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it could be heard from the ground. He dared to peek again and saw the man pointing toward the tree, shouting something to his accomplices. Chris's mind raced. What could he do? He was unarmed, trapped in a treehouse with nothing but a bong and his phone. He heard the crunch of footsteps on the grass below, then the creak of the ladder. Someone was climbing up. Chris backed away from the trapdoor, his hands shaking. He needed a weapon. His eyes darted around the treehouse, landing on the bong. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He gripped it tightly, positioning himself near the trapdoor. The intruder's hand appeared first, gripping the edge of the ladder. Then a head emerged, a man with a scarred face and piercing eyes. He grinned, a knife glinting in his hand. "Thought you could hide up here?" the man sneered. Chris didn't hesitate. He swung the bong with all his strength, smashing it into the man's face. Glass shattered, and the man screamed, losing his grip. He fell back, hitting the ground with a thud. Chris peeked out the window, his heart still racing. The fallen man writhed on the ground, clutching his face, while the other 2 burglars yelled angrily. One of them pointed a gun toward the treehouse, and Chris ducked, his stomach lurching. "Come out, kid," one of them shouted. "You're gonna regret that." Chris pressed himself against the far wall, clutching his phone. The operator was still on the line. "They're armed," he whispered. "I hit one of them, but there are 2 more. Stay where you are," the operator said firmly. "Officers are arriving now." Sure enough, the distant wail of sirens began to cut through the night. The burglars exchanged panicked looks, then started dragging their injured accomplice toward the fence. Chris watched as they disappeared into the darkness, just as the first squad car screeched to a stop in front of the house. The police swarmed the property, their flashlights slicing through the night. Chris climbed down from the treehouse, his legs shaking, and ran to the nearest officer. He explained everything, what he saw, what he did, how he defended himself. Inside the house, his parents were found unharmed, though shaken. The burglars had stolen cash, jewelry, and a few electronics, but their escape meant they were still out there. "You were brave," one officer told Chris, "but you're lucky they didn't do worse. These guys are dangerous." Chris nodded, but the words did little to calm him. That night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't stop replaying the moment he was spotted. The sound of the man climbing the ladder, the fear in his chest as he swung the bong. He knew the burglars were gone, but the sense of vulnerability lingered. In the days that followed, Chris couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside made his heart race. The treehouse, once a place of solace, now stood as a grim reminder of how close danger had come. And sometimes, late at night, Chris thought he heard footsteps in the yard. Imaginary friend, Jake. The treehouse was supposed to be a gift of love. Marcus had spent weeks designing and building it, pouring all his skill as a carpenter into creating the perfect retreat for his 6-year-old son, Luke. Nestled among the trees at the edge of their backyard, the structure was solid and charming, complete with a small window, a trapdoor, and a ladder made from sturdy rope. It even had a tiny bench on the balcony where Luke could sit and watch the woods that bordered their home. "This is amazing, Dad," Luke had exclaimed, his eyes lighting up with joy. He climbed up the ladder that first day, declaring the treehouse his new super-secret base. Marcus smiled, proud of his work. But within weeks, the treehouse became something else entirely, something Marcus couldn't explain, no matter how hard he tried. It started innocently enough. One evening, Marcus found Luke sitting in the treehouse, chatting animatedly with someone. Marcus climbed the ladder, expecting to see one of the neighbor kids, but Luke was alone. "Who were you talking to, buddy?" Marcus asked, peeking inside. Luke grinned. "Jake. Jake." Marcus frowned. He knew most of the neighborhood kids, and there wasn't a Jake among them. "Yeah, my new friend," Luke said. "He lives in the woods, but he plays with me here." Marcus chuckled, assuming it was a typical childhood phase. Imaginary friends weren't unusual. "What's Jake like?" he asked, humoring him. "He's nice," Luke said, swinging his legs, "but he doesn't like to come out when you're around." That was the first red flag. As the weeks passed, Marcus began noticing odd things in and around the treehouse. At first, it was harmless. Dirty socks crumpled in a corner, crumbs from snacks Marcus hadn't given Luke, and wrappers from candies they didn't buy. Marcus assumed Luke was sneaking treats or borrowing things from his friends. But then came the drawings. Marcus found them tucked under the floorboards of the treehouse. Crudely drawn with charcoal, they depicted animals: wolves, crows, and rabbits, with unervingly large eyes and sharp teeth. The details were grotesque, far beyond what a 6-year-old should be able to create. When Marcus showed them to Luke, his son shrugged. "Jake drew them," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Marcus stared at him, unsettled. "Luke, imaginary friends can't draw pictures." Luke just smiled. "Jake can." One evening, Marcus was working in his garage when he heard Luke laughing. Glancing out the window, he saw his son running toward the treehouse, giggling as if someone were chasing him. But no one was there. Marcus followed, calling out to Luke. By the time he reached the treehouse, Luke was sitting inside, swinging his legs over the edge. "Jake says he wants to show me the secret place in the woods," Luke said matter-of-factly. Marcus's stomach tightened. "What secret place?" "I don't know yet," Luke replied, shrugging. "But Jake says it's magic, and I should follow him there." Marcus crouched to Luke's level, trying to keep his voice calm. "Luke, you don't go into the woods, okay? Not without me or your mom. Promise me." Luke hesitated, then nodded. But something about his expression, like he knew something Marcus didn't, sent a shiver down his spine. The night it all came to a head started like any other. Marcus was inside, flipping through a woodworking catalog, when he caught movement outside. He turned toward the window, expecting to see Luke playing in the yard. What he saw instead made his blood run cold. A small, frail figure was climbing down the treehouse ladder. It wasn't Luke. The child was gaunt, with hollow cheeks and dirty, matted hair. They moved with an unnatural grace, glancing toward the woods as if expecting someone to call them. Marcus bolted outside, yelling. The child turned to look at him, their eyes dark and glinting in the moonlight. Then they sprinted toward the trees, vanishing into the shadows before Marcus could reach them. He climbed up the ladder, heart pounding. Luke was inside the treehouse, sitting cross-legged and looking completely unbothered. "Luke!" Marcus barked. "Who was that? Who just climbed down?" Luke tilted his head. "That was Jake," he said, as if Marcus should have known. "He said it's almost time to go." "Go where?" Marcus demanded, his voice trembling. Luke just smiled. "To the secret place." That night, Marcus barely slept. The image of the frail child haunted him, their strange, otherworldly eyes flashing every time he closed his own. The next morning, he called the police. 2 officers came to the house, listening patiently as Marcus explained everything: the notes, the drawings, the food wrappers, and the child he'd seen. They combed the woods, searching for any sign of Jake or other missing children, but they found nothing. The lead officer tried to reassure him. Kids have wild imaginations. It's not uncommon for them to make up elaborate stories. That wasn't a story, Marcus snapped. I saw him. There's someone out there. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner but said nothing. They left soon after, leaving Marcus feeling helpless and angry. A week later, Marcus found Luke sitting at the base of the treehouse, staring at the woods. He wasn't moving, wasn't playing, just sitting there, eyes fixed on the dark expanse of trees. Luke, Marcus approached cautiously. What are you doing? Jake said goodbye, Luke murmured, his voice barely audible. Marcus knelt beside him, dread pooling in his chest. What do you mean? He said the magic place wasn't ready for me yet, Luke said, finally looking up at his father. But he'll come back when it is. Marcus dismantled the treehouse that same day, tearing it down piece by piece despite Luke's protests. He burned the drawings, the dirty socks, and everything else that had been left behind. But even as the flames consumed the wood, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The family stayed in the house for another year before moving. Marcus never told his wife the full story, not wanting to scare her, but he often wondered if Jake had followed them, or if he was still in the woods, waiting. Luke never mentioned Jake again, but sometimes Marcus would catch his son staring out the window, his expression distant, as if listening to someone Marcus couldn't hear. As we've explored these eerie tales, one thing becomes clear: the safety and sanctity of what we hold dear, our homes, our families, our childhood havens, can sometimes be shattered by forces beyond our understanding. Whether it's a mysterious intruder, an unexplainable friend, or a haunting presence, these stories remind us of the fragility of the boundaries we build to keep the unknown at bay. What would you do if you found yourself in these situations? Would you trust your instincts, or would fear hold you back? The unsettling truths behind these fictionalized accounts leave us with a chilling thought. Sometimes, the most terrifying threats aren't what lurk in the shadows, but what waits within our own familiar spaces. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling stories that explore the boundary between the seen and the unseen. Share your thoughts or your own strange encounters in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. And remember, the next time you hear a tap at your window or see a shadow move where it shouldn't, it might be more than just your imagination. Stay safe, stay aware, and we'll see you in the next video.